Hi, I'm Talal Lesmani and welcome to another segment of Mawaheb Chat. Today we're talking about the difficulties of distribution in the region. We have a relatively high cost, production cost floor. And having a higher cost requires greater distribution. And when you have difficulty distributing anyways, you need a solution. So what is that solution and why are the costs so high?
If we talk about the UAE alone, the industry here was built on the advertising market. Advertising agencies coupled with the production companies that control the market, established sort of set standards for the crew rates and for the location rates and so on and so forth. So to try and break these, get a crew member that gets, $400 a day on a commercial shoot for 4 days and tell them I want you to work for $100 a day, but I'm going to give you, 36 days of shoot, doesn't kind of make sense to them. So it's a number of things that all have to work together because I think we're an emerging market, an emerging region in film. We've got to look at it from, I don't think we can look at, say, distribution alone and say this is where the problem is, or stories alone and say, well, this is what the problem is. I think we've got to tackle a number of these things together at the same time to help the market.
And I think that's a process that every emerging film market has to go through. I absolutely agree. You have to match the cost of your filmmaking with the economic potential of the film, because it's only when the films actually make sense economically will you be in a position where you have a self-sustaining industry and a pipeline, and it's only when you have that self-sustaining industry that creatively it can expand as well. You can take risks, discover new audiences, and change the mindset of the audience.
So I think there's partly a responsibility on the distribution is an issue here, but the filmmakers and the producers have to also help distributors by expanding the genre of films that we're making, experimenting a lot more, giving the audience a lot more different. The audience have to, at the moment you go to a cinema in our region and there's, out of let's say 10 movies that are playing, probably 8 of them are US films, maybe there's one from India and one from Egypt. So, that has to change, that balance has to change, whereby every time you go to the cinema, you've got to have a choice of 3 or 4 Arabic films.
Well, Japan has gone in the last 10 years from local films, Japanese films, capturing roughly 20% of the box office to over 60% in 10 years.
Amazing. Wow.
That's a great model to follow if you can steer that path. The secret is that there was an economic downturn in Japan, and the major Japanese distributors were unable to continue paying the same prices for Hollywood output as they were previously, so started to turn to, obviously they had a filmmaking culture stretching back 70 years, but they started to look inwards for their pipeline, and of course that accelerated.
So stop Hollywood movies from getting here.
It wasn't a decision to stop them, it was just an economic decision. They couldn't afford
to get
pricing of those films. And if you look at the big Hollywood tentpole movies that absolutely have dominated the box office around the world in the last few years, the Iron Mans of this world and the Batmans, the Japanese box office is fairly unimpressive.
So what is the future for a successful commercial local film industry? Is it that we have to wait a few decades before a brand new, original, unique voice emerges into the mainstream? Or is it a mashup of, let's say, the Hollywood style and a local voice?
I don't know, because like I said, there have been a few films that came out with that commercial sensibility. My first one, for example, had that, where it was, I don't believe prior to that the local audience saw Emiratis on the big screen the way they did in that film. And it's since that film there was another film, and then there was another film, and then obviously there are going to be more films. So I believe there's a matter of time where they're going to get used to seeing themselves on the big screen with decent quality. But at the same time, given what you said, because they're obviously, and what I was trying to speak about earlier, is that they're so used to also watching Hollywood films that I do see that it's going to end up becoming a mashup between the Western sensibility and the Emirati culture.
I think there's actually, just to add to that point, there's actually something of a globalization of filmmaking techniques going on right now, not just in the context of local filmmakers in the UAE or in India or in China growing up with a Hollywood influence in their storytelling and their filmmaking styles, but also Hollywood itself is adapting to the economic reality that the international audience is now much more economically significant than the US audience, and so are having to make films specifically with an eye on the global audience.
You know, another difficulty with distribution is its track record. So, you know, we'd need to gain a reputation and a trust amongst the Arab audience that, you know, we're delivering good, you know, quality films. How long would it take?
We're not making enough movies. And one of the reasons why we're not making enough movies is, if I look at it sort of from an impartial perspective, is because we haven't proven ourselves in the sense that we can make movies that can make money. And we haven't done that because the cost of making our movies is pretty high relative to the value of our market and what it can offer. So we have to prove to people, investors, there are a lot of people who are interested in film. But when you sit with them and they say, so tell me, what have you made that has made money? What have you, nothing is yet, but I hope.
The next one?
Exactly, and you can't, so what do you do? Do you rely on European funding, which every single body in the world is relying on? Take the UAE, for example. If a film here, one of the highest grossing here was $6.5 million, okay, US blockbuster, you can imagine that a really good genre film can maybe make $3 million here. Make it for $600,000 if you can, shoot it for over a period of 3 weeks, get really technical crew, but you know, small minimum, find a way of doing it in that way, prove yourself, and then you'll get that person to come back and put money in the film again. The thing is that a lot of investors don't have that experience. The money is there are people going to watch the movies. We've got to steal the audiences. And you steal, you know, the producers and the filmmakers have to steal the audiences. No one else. But you have to make the film for your audience. If a filmmaker sits and pitches a story and a project, and you ask him, who is this for? And they tell you, for everybody in the world who has been this. I'm not interested in that kind of film. You've got to know who your audience are, what age they are, which countries they live in, and you've got to make the film for them. And you've got to know what kind of movies these people or this group of people watched in the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
These are things that filmmakers have to study. People in the industry have to study and know. And that really is, it's a rarity that you'll sit with a filmmaker who will be able to answer any of these questions.
But I guess I'm of the school of thought where I believe, especially as a filmmaker, you should make films for everyone and anyone, right? Anyone should be able to enjoy it, whether they're in the Arab world or whether they're, you know, in Eastern Europe or even North America. But I guess I'm a dreamer.
But if you look at the most successful filmmakers in Asia, the most successful filmmakers in France, the most successful filmmakers in Latin America, that's what they do. They basically maximize their audience locally, and then the film may or may not cross over, but they're economically and critically viable because of the local response to the film.
I have a final question I want to ask, and this is for everybody. Talent. So talent, a limited talent can also make distribution more difficult. You know, and there's great talent here, but there's also a catch-22. The skills and jobs for this industry are less financially attractive because of the size of the industry, and so you get fewer people who want to pursue those careers. So what comes first, the chicken or the egg?
Once you have a viable industry that gets movies made and there's enough work to go around, as an industry, it will attract its fair share of bright, talented, driven, creative young people. Just because of the like moth to the flame, it's the magnet that is filmmaking culture. But to do that, I think people have to be able to see, oh, look over there, they're pushing out 50 films a year. There's movies getting made. I can show up aged 23, straight out of university, and go get a low-paying job there. But if I stick around for a few years, I'll move up through the ranks and I'll be involved in lots of films. What kills the talent pipeline is any perception that, what am I going to do? Who's going to use me? What am I going to learn? I think as filmmaking costs globally come down because of increased access to digital technology, both in production and post-production and distribution. Hopefully that opens the gates of entry wider, and that in itself can generate more filmmaking activity, because it always at the end comes back to economic viability.
Well, thank you everybody very much.
Thank
It's
you.
been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Pleasure.